Good morning, everyone. Happy Mondays, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by Mirror Assistant Editor, all-round political specialist and expert Jason Beattie. Now, we're going to go through the biggest stories of the day, and we're going to show you some reasons to be cheerful as well as we head into a second lockdown. And through all of this, we want you to ask us your questions. Ask us the thing that's burning a hole in your brain, and we'll try and put that fire out for you and explain what's going on. So what have we got today? Well, there's lots of stories around. Bobby Charlton is the fifth member of Britain's 1966 World Cup winning squad to be diagnosed with dementia. Anton Dubik has lost his second Home Secretary, and the royal family have actually started cooperating with the Daily Mirror and giving us stories. More on that later. But as I said, keep asking us questions. We want, in particular, if you've got anything on your mind about lockdown, how this is going to work, there's lots of terrifying news in the paper today about that. Keep asking us questions in the comments below, and we'll try and answer them. There's our first one. Hello, Ali. Morning. What about benefit claims? Jason, what about benefit claims during lockdown? How does that work?
Well, we need to hear more from the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, but Labour's calling for an urgent question from Sunak today. Whether that will come or not, or whether it will just be part of Boris Johnson's statement to MPs at 3:30, we don't know. Now, the problem here is that they did increase universal credit by an extra £20. That is kind of set to expire in April, and there's a lot of calls, not just from Labour MPs, but from charities, from organisations saying you've got to keep this going. Even £20 a week is not enough. So yes, a lot of pressure on that. We don't know yet the full details.
Yeah, and it's worth bearing in mind, I saw last week that long COVID, the conditions for COVID that can last a long time, which can affect people who've got very mild symptoms to start with as well, not just those who've had it bad, that doesn't qualify for disability benefits yet. It's not recognised as a disability. So that's another good reason not to try and catch the disease. And Sharon asked, morning Sharon, are the bubbles changing? I assume you're talking about the social bubbles. And as far as I know, Jason can correct me, they're not. I'm a single parent. I get to bubble with my parents who live not far away because I'm a single adult on my own in a household. And I think that's staying the same, isn't it, Jason?
Well, this is the interesting thing. We're meant to know this stuff, Susie. We're right on top of it. And the rules are really confusing. We're still learning as we go along. So as far as I understand it, yes, you can keep the one bubble you have. So, you know, if you're, as you say, if you're a friend with somebody else, you can keep that one. The restrictions are more alongside of like socializing with people from other households. So you can no longer do that in their house or in their garden. You can possibly bump into them in a park, for instance, but that's the limit of it. So, but as I say, there's an awful lot of confusion about what exactly the new kind of lockdown measures involve.
Yeah, and Boris Johnson could be here answering these questions, Sharon, and he would be more confused than Jason or I. So you're ahead of the game. Do we have any more questions? Anything else coming? Our backroom tech gremlin's going to put any more up? Possibly not. So those are the stories we've got today. Keep asking us your questions. Dig into the comments. Let us know what's going on. Now, first, our viewers heard me predict last week, for the umpteenth time, there'll be another lockdown by Christmas. I booked my hair appointment. I'm very smug about that. But now we know cases are soaring. The time lag means that our hospitals are going to be at capacity in a fortnight. Boris Johnson very nearly derailed strictly to tell us that November is off. Now, he told us about this about April, Jason. He said we would have 3-4 weeks out of April, and he didn't let us out again until July. So what are the chances that this lockdown, like the last one, is going to last for 4 months rather than 4 weeks?
Well, if you remember, back in the 17th of July, he gave an interview when he said, I hope there won't be another lockdown. I don't think there's going to be a need for one. And here we are back again with another lockdown. Now, there's an awful lot of anger on the Tory backbenchers about this. There's these lockdown skeptics. They happen to be on the right of the party. Interestingly, a lot of them happen to be Brexiteers. There's an overlap with this. And they are really quite insistent a restriction has been put in place that this lockdown only lasts a month. Now, Michael Gove yesterday on the Andrew Marr show and the Sophie Ridge show, he said, oh, well, we may have to extend it beyond December the 2nd. We're not sure at the moment. That caused apoplexy amongst the Tory kind of lockdown skeptics. And they sent out Rishi Sunak this morning onto the radio to try and calm nerves. And he said there will be a vote. So it's going to last a month and then we'll review it and you get to have a vote on it.
How can we have a vote on whether a virus goes away? We can't vote it out of existence. It's there or it's not. And the problem, all this bothers me with these the lockdown skeptics. Yeah, they're not great. Yeah, they're awful. No one wants to do it. But if you don't lock down and hospitals are overwhelmed and there are bodies piling up in the corridors, and it's like Italy was at the start of its pandemic, if we can all remember that, then there is a huge economic cost to that too. There is social cost, there are suicides, there is bereavement, there are people losing their jobs if bodies pile up, just as if there is if we don't let the bodies pile up. The only benefit of lockdown is that you have kicked the can down the road a little bit and the deaths are happening at a manageable rate rather than all at once. That is the only benefit. And that's what he's trying to do, isn't it?
Well, he doesn't want to be the prime minister who cancels Christmas. And the one thing we know about Boris Johnson, he really hates delivering bad news. It's just not part of his psyche at all. He wants to be the cheerful, upbeat, kind of boosterish prime minister. And he's kind of found himself in a situation which, one, he's not particularly well equipped to handling. I mean, he doesn't do detail. He doesn't deliver bad news properly. And two, it's just against how he does politics. He likes to be the campaigning on the front foot, cheering people up politician, and not the one who has to kind of tell people to stay at home and, kind of face kind of quite difficult and restrictions, which, as you say, have consequences for mental health, have consequences for isolation, and have very bad consequences for jobs and livelihoods.
Exactly. And Julian asks as well about the consequences for hospital appointments. And I think, Julian, that this is dependent upon your local hospital and how well they're able to manage the local demands on their services, because some hospitals are having to cancel outpatient and less urgent appointments because they have to move staff to be retrained to go into ICU because they've got a huge problem locally. The hospitals in the Northwest, for example, are having a much worse time than hospitals in the Southeast or the Southwest at the moment. But some of what's happening is that there's fears that that's going to change and spread across all the hospitals before too much longer. What do you think, Jason?
Well, this is a very important point. They are going out of their way to stress that, the NHS is still open for non-COVID cases. Please, do not kind of hold back. Do not sit in your hands if you think you have a medical problem. It has to be there for. Right? I'll speak personally here. I lost a friend during the first lockdown who had cancer and did not go to hospital, and she died. And, this is quite an important point.
Yes, exactly. So if you've got anything wrong with you people, go out there and go and find a doctor. They do actually want to help you. They don't want to lock down hospitals for you, and they will do their best for you. As keep asking us your questions, and we're going to keep trying to answer them. Now, what took Boris Johnson so long? Right now, September the 20th, there's a great infographic there on page, whatever that is of the Mirror, page 4, I think. It's September the 21st, Sage called for a lockdown and he refused. On October the 13th, 3 weeks later, Keir Starmer said, we're going to have a 2 to 3 week circuit breaker, aren't we? And he was accused of shameless opportunism. On October the 30th, last Friday, the Sage papers were published showing he was urged to do this and that he was urged to do it again 2 weeks before that, because the Sage papers are published with a 2-week lag. And then after some leaks, he makes this hurried announcement on Saturday. Now, Jason, you'd have thought, wouldn't you, that he'd have learned the lesson of why late lockdowns are a terrible thing. It's terrible for the economy. It's terrible for deaths, terrible for him. Why has it taken him so long this time?
As I say, this is that he's got the problem with his own backbenchers. I mean, this is putting party politics and trying to manage the rebellious Tory party ahead of what is in the national interest. Not we haven't seen that before with the Conservatives. I mean, it is really kind of boggling that he ignored the Sage advice in September. The advantage of what they called a circuit break, a 2-week circuit break then, was they could have run it over half term, which meant that it would be less disruption to schools. And also, the science is still out on this one. If children can pass on the infection, then, that would have actually helped prevent it because they wouldn't have been at school to do so. So it would have been a shorter lockdown because it was just going to be 2 weeks, this fire break, as they did in Wales. Rather than the month we've got now, we've actually probably tighter restrictions. So it was all about party management as far as I can work out. And he made the calamitous mistake then of actually kind of trying to kind of attack Keir Starmer for calling this. He, as you said, he called him an opportunist. The Tories put out attack ads saying that Labour wanted to heap misery on the country, but a second national lockdown would be disastrous. And this was all, Labour's idea. And now they're having to do exactly that. It doesn't look good. The optics are bad. He looks like he conceded ground to Keir Starmer. Do you remember he used to dub Keir Starmer Captain Hindsight? Now, Keir Starmer looks like the greatest seer in Britain. So you can see that this is kind of played out very badly for the Prime Minister.
Exactly. And then now Elaine asks, do I have to send my kids to school as 2 of them are vulnerable and so am I? I think you're going to have to talk to your school about that rather than us, to be honest, Elaine, because if you don't send your children to school when the schools are open, you're technically breaking the law. So you have to. But if you've got some health concerns, if your children have got some health concerns, I think also it might depend a bit on which age your children are. My daughter goes to primary school. She's in reception. She's in a very, very, very low risk group. If she was going to a secondary school where there's lots of transmissions at the moment, I'd be a lot more worried. Have you got any insight on that, Jason, or is that?
No, this is right. I mean, the science shows that young children are not particularly susceptible to COVID, and they do get it in the vast majority of cases. They get it very lightly. The higher you go up the age range, the worse the problem comes. So under 16, they think there's a minimal problem with children going to school. It's when you get in the real big bracket, the bracket where they saw the greatest range of infections was 18 to 24-year-olds. But creeping into that is 16 to 18-year-olds as well. So if it was an argument for closing schools, it's probably an argument for closing sixth form rather than from closing schools outright.
Yeah. And this is something I think as well we need to bear in mind about a second lockdown. And partly in answer to Bex's question here, having done all this before and having had the impact of this before, there are some things which are going to change. We now have the single adult bubble. That's not going to change. That didn't exist in the first lockdown, although I did it anyway. There was also the businesses have learned to do, pubs are doing takeaways that weren't doing it before. Businesses have learned to do deliveries that they weren't doing before. And they've also realised that a lot of schools can stay open. Childcare can still happen, which will enable people to work. Even if they're working from home, you can work easier if the children are being looked after. So the economic impact, hopefully, would be a bit less. Now, why are schools not closing for a month too, says Bex, if restaurants are closing and I have a newborn baby, do I have to send my children? I think that's pretty much the same question we just answered, isn't it, Jace?
Yeah, I mean, they are really keen to try and keep schools open for 2 reasons. One, because of the disruption to education. Children already lost 3 months of education earlier this year, and secondly, because the science has changed. They're now more confident about the danger to children from being exposed to COVID. So this is why they think they can keep schools open, for those 2 reasons.
Yeah, and perhaps if you've got a newborn, you might want to suggest to the older siblings that they don't want to come home and give it a cuddle without washing their hands and kissing it all the time. So keep asking us your questions. We're going to keep trying to answer them. Now, one thing I want to know, Jason, and this is my personal bet, right? If I had to stake money on how long Boris Johnson has left in office, it would be in weeks rather than years. Although he's got this big parliamentary majority, he's losing his party, he's lost the country. And there are going to be moves against him once they can say Brexit is finished. I think the headbangers and the Tories, for whom he was their own best chance of Brexit, they're going to dethrone him. They're going to blame Boris for all this lockdown, all the economic double dip recession, everything else, and then get a clean skin in spring once we get out of lockdown again. What do you reckon?
I'm in the slightly different, don't underestimate Boris Johnson camp. He is a great political survivor. His career has been written off countless times, and he keeps showing an ability to bounce back. But, and this is the big but, the real issue he has is as a plausible king in waiting in the form of Rishi Sunak. And while Rishi is there, and, again, he gave a very confident performance of the Chancellor this morning on the radio. He sounded reassuring. He sounded in control. He sounded on top of the detail. All the things Boris Johnson doesn't do when he's interviewed or gives statements. Then Boris Johnson is going to be in some form of danger, because people keep going, well, we've got this guy there. He could be so much better. He could calm the Tory nerves. And Sunak's played quite a clever game of siding himself with the lockdown skeptics. He's the person who's doing this reluctantly. So you can see that he's kind of, using this almost, I'm no idea how cynical Rishi Sunak is to actually kind of, position himself should a vacancy arise. But my hunch is that I think Boris Johnson is once you become Prime Minister, I know very few who actually want to give it up willingly.
No, but I do like big butts. I cannot lie. And I think that Rishi Sunak is a good money on him, perhaps, for the new year. If the second wave is the last wave, they'll want to put space between.
This is Labour's big fear. They'd much rather have Keir Starmer be up against Boris Johnson than up against Sunak. I memean, Starmer's almost the perfect foil for Boris Johnson. Starmer, he's competent, he's on top of the detail, he sounds authoritative. He is the best alternative you could present. Against Sunak, it's a slightly more daunting proposition for Starmer. Sunak brings youth, he brings energy to the job, and as I said, he's got this very good bedside manner. So, if I were Labour, I'd probably want to keep Johnson in post for the next general election rather than Sunak.
Yes, well, we'll have to see how it goes. Keep asking us your questions and we're going to try and answer them. Janice, hi, why didn't the government tell people not to panic buy because older people can't get the shopping? Why doesn't the government tell people everything, Janice? Because they're not telling people anything the right thing at the right time. It would help if they explained statistics and risks in a pandemic as well and how you put other people first in order to protect yourself. But it doesn't apparently happen that they tell people the sensible stuff. But no, don't panic buy. Because there is plenty of food. The supermarkets are staying open. You don't need to worry. But I do hope you've got your toilet paper because Armageddon is due this week. Now, tomorrow, what a segue. Tomorrow, it's the US election. And there are fears that Donald Trump, despite losing bigly, is going to declare victory on the night and then litigate for months as Joe Biden's votes are counted perhaps a month later. And even if Biden completely wipes him out in those votes, we're looking at a violent race war in either way, aren't we, Jason?
Well, it's these frightening images we've got of the shops being boarded up in Washington, D.C. amid fears of violence on the streets by kind of, Trump supporters. They call themselves patriots, always ironically in my mind. Now, we just have to hope that Biden wins big and wins kind of definitively, because, as you say, the Trump game plan seems to be that because the postal votes come in later, if there's not a clear-cut result after kind of Tuesday, that Trump will bunker down in the White House. Ironically, they're building a ring of steel, a wall around the White House at the moment, just to keep him in.
Beautiful wall. Apparently, it's unscalable. It can't be climbed. I think people are going to put that to the test fairly rapidly after November the 3rd. But the best you could probably hope for is that Biden's win, which appears quite definite, more so than Hillary's was on the cards in 2016, that Biden's win is so crushing that even on Tuesday, it's apparent that Biden's won the Electoral College. And, after that, it's just counting how many extra he's got. Because if there's a split between the two, if it's close, especially in some of the swing states, Trump's already got lawyers, hasn't he? In some of these counts, they're already trying to push hundreds of thousands of votes out of contention.
And it's worse. I mean, it's not just the Supreme Court nomination, Amy Beck-Kroner this week, or last week, but is crucial. It's the Republican dominance of the kind of courts in the certain states they will get to rule if the result is close, and that is where it gets quite scary, where the lawyers get to usurp democracy. And this is why we need this categorical win from Joe Biden. And we were all so burnt by the polls 4 years ago, which put Hillary Clinton ahead, only to find that Trump won, that nobody really wants to believe the polls this time around, even though they show that Biden has a commanding lead in most of the swing states. Not all of them, most of them.
And it's worth bearing in mind, keep your eyes open for this, people, that the Electoral College, the electors in every state, there's a couple in every state who then vote in turn for the president. They are supposed to vote the way the popular vote has gone in their state, but they don't have to. if they can say, if the Electoral College voters in that state can say, we think the vote's been gerrymandered, or that the popular vote is fake, or that it's not legitimate in some way, they can vote the way they think the state ought to have voted. Republican states, that's very hairy. And in Democrat states, even, it will provoke, lots of claims of trying to steal the election. So the American system is so different to ours. Why can't they just count crosses on a piece of paper, Jason? Why have they got to make it so complicated?
I mean, the real problem with the American system is it just hasn't kept up with time. So you've got this kind of democratic deficit on a huge scale, where just a few states with quite small populations get to decide the outcome, not just of the presidential election, but also the balance of power in the Senate. So because each state gets 2 senators, that means North Dakota, population of about 500,000, has the same number of representatives as California, with a population of 30 million. That's just a major, major issue. So you get people representing 17% of the population able to make 80% of the laws. They've got to change it at some point, and but will they?
Well, if Trump manages to gerrymander things in his favor, and there's going to be some massive conflict if he does that, perhaps that would be reason, after a decade's bloodshed or something, to start fixing it. Now, my former father-in-law used to say the problem with America was they never had its Renaissance. Had never had a moment of reinvention, of looking again at its founding principles and deciding whether it should stick to those or try something new. Perhaps Trump, for all his awfulness, would be the trigger for that. Maybe. Yeah,
I mean, I think the interesting thing about Trump, from our point of view, this whole election is, and it's got real read over to what could happen in the UK, is this: Biden has campaigned not on policy, but on decency. He's talking about the soul of America. He's talking about bringing back, decency, order to the American system. And that's resonating quite strongly. And you think, if I were Boris Johnson, I'll be looking at this going, all we've had in Britain for the last 10 years has been our own form of carnage, whether it's the independence referendum in Scotland, whether it's a Brexit referendum, whether it's endless haggling over Brexit, or whether it's COVID. It just seemed like a kind of whirlwind decade where nobody's had time to catch their breath, and people maybe just this appetite for just calmness has probably never been stronger, and also an appetite, as I say, for kind of bringing back respectability. And Biden speaks that, and you wonder if Starmer also could mine that scene. He'd probably do very, very well.
Yes, just having the grown-ups back in the room would be a help, wouldn't it, at this stage? Now, finally, let's have something to be cheerful about. Let's move it on to something we can be happy about. Now, if you didn't watch the Mirror's Pride of Britain Awards on Sunday night, you should. It'll be on the ITV catch-up thing, so you should definitely try and catch up with that. Take your tissues with you, because you will cry throughout. Not only were there stories that would just warm the cockles of your heart, but there was a story that even warmed the cockles of this hack's old grizzled, withered heart, which is that the next 2 kings of the United Kingdom actually cooperated with the Daily Mirror, the paper that put a fake footman in the palace, remember, to give us stories by presenting some of the awards. Now, it warms my heart to see Charles and William acting as our interns. Jason, what did you think of Pride of Britain?
Oh, I'd love Pride of Britain. I mean, every year, it was a shame because normally, Susie, we get to go to the awards ceremony in a swanky London hotel, and we sit there and we get free food and wine. And every year I go along going, this is a real struggle, I'm kind of, as you say, the bitter old hack in me comes out, and every year I end up weeping and crying. And actually this year was no exception. It was Emmy who did it for me. I'm not sure about you. That was the one when I suddenly felt a little bit of grit in my eye, and I was just kind of wiping away the tears.
Yeah, I wrote about her last week. Emmy Lorraine Nichols, she was, I think it was 8 years old when she got leukemia. And when she was in hospital being treated, she looked around her and said to her parents, no one's looking after the mummies and daddies, which is an amazing thing even to have spotted. And then she set up a charity, didn't she? Creating sort of food parcels and toiletry packs for the parents who are there at Greater Manchester Children's Hospital, Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. And she's running her own charity now. And she's only 11.
I know. And she got Pride of Britain for Marcus Rashford, and it was just such a touching moment. And Marcus Rashford looked so kind of bashful as well when he got his own award. It was, that was the one which tipped me over. And then I was fully in the Pride of Britain spirit yet again.
Yeah, it should be done. If you're feeling gloomy about lockdown version 2.0, then go to the ITV hub and try to find the Pride of Britain Awards, because it's really, really worth your time. Louise, OMG, what's your answer? Do you think schools should close? I think secondary schools should close because they are a seat of infection. And I think they should not close for too long. And I think you've got huge problems with children's education then. I think they probably should, but not primary schools. What do you think, Jason?
This is such a tough one, Louise. My sister works in a school. She thinks they should stay open. I've got other friends who are teachers who think they should close. It's really difficult. The scientific advice is not clear cut on this one. And you've got to balance whatever the scientists say with the kind of consequences of children's education. I'm sitting slightly on the fence here, and it's quite obvious, isn't it? And my apologies, but it's I do get the need to save lives, to protect children, to protect teachers, but I am also very conscious of the consequences of children's education.
Yeah, and what we need to bear in mind as well, is this just anti-Trump, Ali? Yes! He's a moron. He's a dangerous moron. If you're pro-Trump, go somewhere else, because you're not going to find anything nice about that Oompa Loompa here. The thing people, getting back to COVID, sorry, Ali, but that's just how I feel. And it's my show. Getting back to COVID, the thing about schools is that children may be at low risk, but there are children who are taught by parents and who live at home, as we've already heard from some of our other viewers, who have vulnerable people in their families. I'm in a single parent bubble, but my daughter sees her grandparents all the time who are in their 70s. And there's all these exchange of parents at the school gates picking up and dropping off children, and you can't be socially distanced all the time through that. So there are other risks at schools, aren't there? And Sasha asks, now, are driving tests still going through? I saw something briefly about that, but I didn't read it. So I don't know.
Remember the advice on that one? Sorry.
Oh, we failed. We failed.
Yeah. You found it. Sasha, we'll try and come back to you. Susie will try and come back to you tomorrow.
Don't worry. We'll put it in the comments. I can't Google it now because the whole screen goes and I don't know what's going on. I did see something about driving tests, and I think lessons are off, but tests are on if they're booked. I'm not sure. I'm guessing. So Google it. Don't rely on me.
I've got my crib sheet here in front of me, and I still can't see it anywhere.
Never mind. Well, I think one thing I do want to say before we go and before we wrap up. Oh, hang on, Michelle. It's all about saving the NHS. What about saving us carers that haven't stopped working throughout the pandemic and still working 0 hours contracts? There are an awful lot of people who've never stopped work, who never locked down, the key workers. I remember at the start of the first pandemic, there was that little app, wasn't there, that could tell us how many people were moving around London. And it was 7% of the normal journeys were taking place. And it was those 7% of people who were the key workers, who were the carers, who were the nurses, who were the doctors, who were the maintenance engineers and the maintenance crews, who were keeping the lights on and keeping things going. And those are the most important people. And if you don't have that, the other 93% of us are just fannying about. But if those 7% of people aren't doing their jobs.
Sorry, Michelle, no disrespect. We obviously include carers in what we're talking about. We really value what you do. And it's absolutely shameful you're still on 0 hours contracts. And a lot of that time, as you know better than I do, includes also travelling time as well. So that gets deducted from your wages. We've campaigned about this on the Mirror for the last 4 or 5 years. We'll keep doing it, promise you.
Yes, and the care system in this country should be folded into the NHS, because that's the way to care for the most people, the most efficiently, with the most career progression and better pay for the carers and everything else. So we're on your side, Michelle, fundamentally. Now, I think we're just about wrapping up because we've had half an hour of your time and Jason's. Thank you very much for popping in, everybody. We're going to go and find out about driving tests, and I'm going to reply to Sasha and tell her what's going on with that as soon as I can figure it out. Please don't be too depressed about lockdown. I think we're going to do it better this time than we did last time. And maybe, you never know, Boris might be gone in the new year. So that's to look forward to. Keep your heads down, and let's hope tomorrow isn't too awful in America. Thanks for popping in, everyone. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks,
Bye.